There was a deception, ancient, crafted in the shadows, whispered not by man but by the serpent himself, that seeks to dethrone the Holy One, to strip the Messiah of his glory, to twist the truth that was sealed before the foundations of the world. They say he is not God. They say he is not divine. They declare that the Son is not the Son, and the Word made flesh was never more than flesh. But I tell you now, this is not just a lie. It is war, a war against the Lamb, against the Lion of Judah, against the very rock upon which all truth stands. For centuries the prophets spoke, the scrolls were opened, the signs written in blood and fire. And the voice thundered from the heavens, "This is my beloved Son." Yet in this hour, as the mystery of lawlessness grows, voices rise to rewrite what is eternal, to turn worship into heresy, and to call light darkness. We are living in the days of apostasy, where doctrines of demons are dressed in robes of intellect and wrapped in the arrogance of man. But make no mistake, the denial of his divinity is not a revelation, it is not a revelation. It is not enlightenment, it is deception. And those who echo it, knowingly or blindly, become vessels of that ancient war. This is not a debate of theology. This is a cosmic confrontation. A war between truth and the lie. Between the eternal word and the serpent's hiss. Between the voice that said, "Before Abraham was, I am," and the voice that still says, "Did God really say?" From the beginning of the age, the adversary has not sought to destroy truth outright, but to twist it. Just enough to sound holy while leading millions astray. It began not with violence, but with infiltration, but to denigrate, but to infill, not with rejection, but with redefinition. And so it was that a pagan shadow crept into the early gatherings of the faithful, distorting the simplicity of God's oneness, cloaking the pure Hebrew foundation in a Roman veil. The message that thundered from Sinai, "The Lord is one," was slowly diluted by the philosophies of Greece and the myths of Babylon, until the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was reimagined through a foreign lens. It was never the prophets who spoke of a man becoming God. It was never Moses or Isaiah who declared that the eternal would divide himself into persons or manifest as a second deity. No, this language was alien, birthed not in Jerusalem, but in Alexandria, in Athens, in Rome. The empires that once crucified the righteous began to clothe themselves in garments of light, and what they could not crush, they conquered by seduction. He says, "There was no sign, nor judgment, nor commandment, nor precepts, nor sentence, nor testament, nor contract, nor commandment, nor precept, nor sentence, nor contract, nor contest, nor contract, nor commandment, nor precept, nor sentence." The pure stream of monotheism entrusted to Israel became muddied by the rivers of idolatry. The Son of Man, whom the Scriptures exalt as servant, prophet, redeemer, was lifted upon a throne not by divine command, but by theological manipulation. It was subtle. It was strategic. In the early centuries, as Gentiles flooded into the faith, many carried with them their old beliefs. Gods born of gods, divine sons who die and rise, three-in-one deities whose mysteries are too great to question. These ideas found fertile ground among those who did not know Torah, who did not speak Hebrew, who were disconnected from the soil of Mount Zion. They sought to understand the Messiah not through the lens of Moses, but through Plato. Not through the covenant of YHWH, but through the counsels of men. The enemy's strategy was brilliant. He did not oppose Yeshua. He exalted him beyond what was written. He did not deny the Messiah. He redefined him until he no longer resembled the anointed one foretold by the prophets. The suffering servant became the second person of a triune Godhead. The man who prayed to his Father was declared to be that very same Father. The Messiah who said, "My Father is greater than I," was proclaimed co-equal. The simplicity of the faith was replaced by creeds so complex that even their authors called them mysteries beyond understanding. He was replaced by creeds so complex that even their authors called them mysteries beyond understanding. And so doctrines were forged not by revelation but by vote. Councils were convened not by prophets but by emperors. The Nicene Creed did not descend from heaven. It rose from political compromise and fear of heresy. And those who questioned this new orthodoxy were silenced, exiled, or burned. Thus, the religion of power was born. Not the faith of Messiah, but a counterfeit bearing his name. The shepherd became an idol. The servant became an object of worship. And the truth of God's indivisible nature was replaced by a theological puzzle that still confounds the minds of men. Yet the Scriptures cry out with clarity, "I am God, and there is no other. Before me there was no God formed, neither shall there be after me." These were not metaphors, not riddles to be unraveled, but declarations of truth etched in stone and sealed in the blood of martyrs. The God of Israel did not change. He did not divide himself. He did not become man. He sent a man. He anointed his servant. He fulfilled his word, not by breaking his oneness, but by keeping his promise. The Scriptures, the true Scriptures, the ancient scrolls spoken by the breath of God through the mouths of prophets, never once declared that the Messiah would be divine. Not once did Moses, Isaiah, Jeremiah, or any prophet of the Most High proclaim that the Anointed One would be God himself. The message was not hidden. It was not shrouded in mystery. It was proclaimed with power and precision that the Messiah would be a man, chosen, appointed, and empowered by God, not God incarnate, not the second person of a heavenly Trinity. The expectation of Israel was never for God to come down in flesh, but for God to raise up a deliverer, a son of man from among his people, a prophet like Moses, a servant of the covenant. The deception begins when man refuses to hear the word for what it plainly says, and the voice of tradition speaks louder than the voice of the prophets. The enemy knows the danger of the pure word, so he overlays it with confusion, with creeds, with councils, with pagan philosophy, dressed in garments of light. But the Hebrew Scriptures, the oracles entrusted to Israel, reveal the truth in every line. The Messiah would be born of a woman, from the seed of David, from the house of Judah. He would be called God's servant, God's chosen one, the branch, the Son of Man. Never once did the prophets call him God the Son. Never once did they teach that the Holy One would become flesh. That was not revelation, that was rebellion. Isaiah spoke of the suffering servant, one who would be wounded for our transgressions, who would bear our iniquities. But he also said, he shall see his offspring, he shall prolong his days. A man, not a deity. One who would learn obedience through suffering, who would grow in wisdom and stature before God and man. The Messiah was to be the arm of the Lord, yes, but not the Lord himself. A representative, a vessel, a man upon whom the Spirit would rest. The Spirit is not the flesh. The one who receives the Spirit is not the same as the one who sends it. The Messiah would cry out to God, be strengthened by God, be glorified by God, not because he was God, but because he was obedient unto death. The Psalms speak of the one who says, "You are my God," not "I am God." They speak of one whom God would exalt, one whom God would make king, one who would sit at God's right hand, not be the right hand. The very language of the prophets draws a line between the Holy One of Israel and the one he sent. Hosea declares, "I am God and not a man." Numbers declares that God is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should repent. Yet the modern doctrine makes God into a man, makes the infinite into the finite, the eternal into the mortal. It is not the Word that speaks this. It is tradition that whispers it, and paganism that gave it birth. When the prophets spoke of Emmanuel, God with us, they spoke of a sign, not an incarnation. They spoke of a sign, not an incarnation, a sign that God was moving on behalf of his people, that his presence would be manifested through the acts of his anointed. When they spoke of the one called Mighty God, they used terms that describe divine authority given, not divine essence possessed. To bear the name of God was to represent his power, not to be him in substance. Kings of Israel were called sons of God. Judges were called Elohim. It was a title of office, never a declaration of divinity. The Messiah came not to be worshipped, but to direct worship to the one who sent him. In the centuries that followed the resurrection, the faith that was once rooted in the soil of Jerusalem was uprooted and replanted in the marble halls of Rome. What began as a living movement of the Spirit, grounded in Hebrew prophecy and covenantal truth, was slowly absorbed into the machinery of empire. No longer a faith born in the wilderness and tested by fire, it became a religion shaped by decree, forged not in revelation but in political strategy. And at the center of this transformation was a council, not a gathering of prophets, not a convocation of those who had walked with the Messiah or heard his voice, but a Roman assembly under the authority of an emperor, not a shepherd. It was not the Spirit that called the Council of Nicaea. It was Constantine, a ruler who sought unity, not of truth, but of empire. A man who wore the cross, but never laid down his sword, who worshiped the sun while presiding over a council to define the sun. And it was in this setting, surrounded by division, heresy, and fear of instability, that the foundation was laid for a new gospel. A gospel that made the Son equal to the Father, not by revelation, but by vote. Men argued, debated, and cast their decisions like scribes drafting a constitution, not like servants receiving a word from on high. And the result was the birth of a doctrine foreign to the apostles, unknown to the prophets, and alien to the Hebrew Scriptures. The doctrine of the Trinity. There is no scroll in the Torah, no vision in the prophets, no Psalm of David that speaks of three co-equal, co-eternal persons in one divine essence. He says the Torah is dull, it's boring, no one wants it, no one needs it, no one seeks it for their own faith. There is no scroll in the Torah, co-eternal persons in one divine essence. There is no scroll in the Torah, co-eternal persons in one divine essence. There is no voice from heaven that speaks of such a mystery. It was not revelation, it was compromise. A compromise between the monotheism of the Jews and the polytheism of the Greeks. A theological hybrid that pleased philosophers but grieved the Spirit. The early believers did not worship a triune God. They called upon the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the one who is indivisible, eternal, and alone worthy of praise. But with each council that followed, Constantinople, Ephesus, Chalcedon, the man-made doctrine grew more rigid, more complex, more removed from the simple truth. What was once the mystery of godliness, God working through his servant, anointing a man to fulfill his purposes, was replaced with metaphysical puzzles. The Son was declared to be begotten but not made, of the same substance as the Father, eternally existent, co-powerful. These were not the words of Peter or John. These were the echoes of Plato, the residue of Gnostic speculation baptized into church doctrine. And when voices rose to challenge this invention, voices who clung to the Scriptures, who held fast to the Shema, who refused to call a man God, they were branded as heretics, exiled, silenced, or slain. This is the root of the lie, the elevation of a man into the divine, not by prophecy, but by politics. The transformation of a servant into a god, not by spirit, but by sword. And so the faith of the early believers was overtaken by an imperial religion that bore the name of Christ, but not his truth. The cornerstone was replaced, the foundation was cracked, and yet the world accepted it because it came with power, prestige, and the illusion of unity. The very thing the Messiah rejected, kingdoms of this world, authority from men, became the pillars of a counterfeit gospel. And the simplicity of "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one," was replaced with formulas and creeds designed to protect a lie. The Messiah did not come to exalt himself, nor to claim divinity, nor to draw worship unto his own name. He came as the servant of the Most High, the fulfillment of the covenant, the vessel through whom the will of God would be made manifest upon the earth. The mission was never to become the object of worship, but to restore the lost sheep to the shepherd, to reconcile man not to a second God, but to the one and only. He prayed to the Father, submitted to the Father, and pointed all glory back to the Father. His words were not cloaked in ambiguity. They were direct, resounding with the authority of truth. The Father is greater than I. I do nothing of myself. I speak only what the Father has taught me. These were not riddles, they were declarations of the mission. He came to do the will of the one who sent him, not to sit beside him as a co-equal deity. He was anointed, not incarnated, chosen, not coexistent. He came in the likeness of men, not as God in disguise, but as a man in whom God was pleased to dwell. Not the fullness of deity in essence, but the fullness of purpose, of obedience, of spirit. To say otherwise is to distort the mission, to turn the servant into the master and the vessel into the source. But the Scriptures cry out from beginning to end with clarity, God is not a man. And the Messiah, though exalted, remained a man, the son of David, the prophet like Moses, the one who would be crowned not as God, but as the king appointed by God. He wept, he slept, he ate, he grew in wisdom, he was tempted, he cried out in anguish, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Can God be forsaken by God? He didn't forsake me, God. He cried out in anguish, my God. He was tried. Can God cry out to himself in confusion, in sorrow, in desperation? These are not the marks of deity. They are the marks of a faithful servant walking the path of sacrifice. Every act, every miracle, every teaching pointed not to his own power, but to the power of the one who sent him. He did not claim glory, but reflected it. He did not demand worship, but directed it. He did not replace the Father, but revealed him. The tragedy of him, he was the image, not the source. The ambassador, not the king. The Son, not the Father. The nations have believed a great twisting, a great deception that was not sown in the soil of Jerusalem, but grafted in by Rome, baptized by councils, and enforced by the sword. They took the mission of the Messiah and reshaped it into something unrecognizable. They elevated the mission of the Messiah and reshaped it into something unrecognizable. They elevated the mission of the Messiah who was God by birth. The Messiah was the overseer of the law. The Messiah, they set him above the station. The Messiah who's the seed. The Messiah who's the Son. They declared the representative to be the very being he represented. And in doing so, they created a new faith. One with golden images of the Son, bowed down to and prayed to while the voice of the Father faded into the background. Yet the Scriptures do not lie. The mission of the Messiah was always rooted in humility. He emptied himself, not of divinity, for he never possessed it, but of earthly honor. He became obedient unto death, not as a God dying for men, but as a man laying down his life for the will of God. He was the lamb without blemish, not the lamb who was also the shepherd. The shepherd was always the Father, and the Messiah came as his perfect sheep. He came to model obedience, to live the Torah, to fulfill righteousness, and to open the gates of the kingdom, not to replace the king, but to usher the people back to him. His mission was singular: to glorify the Father, to finish the work given to him, to proclaim the kingdom, and to make known the God of Israel to the nations. The prophets did not speak in confusion. They did not veil the truth in riddles meant only for scholars. They spoke with fire, with thunder, with the authority of the living God, declaring not the doctrines of men, but the uncompromised word of the Most High. Again and again they warned the people, cried out in the streets, stood before kings and priests and multitudes, calling Israel back from the edge of spiritual corruption. And what was the great danger? It was not atheism, it was not lawlessness, it was not even immorality at its root. It was idolatry. The taking of that which is not God and lifting it as God. The shaping of images, the exalting of man, the blurring of the line between creator and creation, the sexual order, the superstition, the shadowy menace, the shadowy garment of sin, the shadowy mind of death, and God. The one thing, the thing that was not God and lifting it as God. The one thing, the thing that was not God and lifting it as God. The one thing, the thing that was not God and lifting it as God. The one thing, it was the fact of the matter that when God didn't send, and in this ancient pattern, the prophets saw not only their present danger, but a future deception, a final delusion that would descend like a mist over the people who once carried the light. Over and over again, the Scriptures thundered, "I am the Lord, that is my name, and my glory I will not give to another." The message was clear, unmistakable, unyielding. God does not share his worship. God does not distribute his divinity. God does not step down from his throne to become flesh, nor does he allow flesh to be mistaken for his essence. Yet today, that very line has been crossed by millions who say they worship God but kneel before a man, who say they love the Father but give divine titles to the servant. This is not faith, it is idolatry repackaged in church language, dressed in robes of tradition, spoken from pulpits and platforms across the world. The prophets would have torn their garments. They would have cried out in horror. They would have called this blasphemy, not blessing, for they knew what it meant to worship the Holy One of Israel, the one whose voice shook Mount Sinai, the one whom no man could see and live. They knew that to confuse the creation with the Creator was to invite judgment. They spoke against those who bowed to Baal, who made golden calves, who offered sacrifices to images of power. How much more would they speak against those who call a man God, who declare that the flesh of a servant is the eternal Almighty, who pray not to the God of Abraham, but to one who walked dusty roads, slept in boats, wept at graves, and died at the hands of men? This is the forgotten warning, that in the last days many would depart from the truth, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines not of God but of demons. Not through rejection of the Scriptures, but by twisting them. Not through open rebellion, but through subtle deception. A shift in language, a change in title, a bending of verses, until the servant becomes the master and the anointed becomes the anointer. The prophets foresaw it. They spoke of a time when the people would have itching ears, when they would prefer smooth words to truth, when they would build altars to a god of their own making. They warned of a day when truth would fall in the streets and the name of the Lord would be forgotten even by those who claim to serve Him. And yet, even in this darkness, the voice of the prophets still echoes. It calls the people back to the ancient path, the narrow way, the true worship of the one who never changes, the God who declares, "Before me there was no God formed, neither shall there be after me," the God who needs no helper, no equal, no second self, the God who anointed His servant not to be worshipped but to lead the nations in worship of the one true King. The warnings were never removed. They were not canceled by grace or voided by miracles. They remain as pillars of fire, reminders that God is holy, and that to misplace worship is to misplace salvation itself. There is a deception rising in the earth, cloaked not in rebellion but in reverence, not in open denial but in false devotion. It is the final deception, the great lie foretold by the prophets and warned of by the Messiah Himself. A deception so strong, so convincing, that if it were possible, even the elect would be drawn into it. And it does not come as darkness but disguised as light, not as an attack against Christ, but as a counterfeit version of Him, a Christ fashioned by men, exalted by tradition, worshipped by millions, yet unrecognizable to the prophets who foretold Him or the Scriptures that defined Him. The world is being prepared not for the return of the true Messiah, but for a figure who stands in His place. A figure built not by the Spirit of God, but by centuries of doctrinal compromise. This is the Christ of councils, not of covenant. The Christ whose identity was not revealed by divine fire, but determined by imperial decree. The Christ who sits in the temples of men as God, proclaimed divine, worshipped as the Almighty, yet differing from the one who cried in Gethsemane, who was sent, who obeyed, who bowed to the Father. This is the false Christ, the image of God shaped in the likeness of man's imagination. And this image is now seated at the center of modern Christianity, enshrined in worship songs, etched into stained glass, invoked in prayers, and lifted above even the Father Himself. The final deception is not to deny Jesus, but to redefine Him. To take the Son of Man and remake Him into the Eternal One. To confuse the messenger with the master, the anointed with the anointer, the vessel with the voice. It is not atheism that threatens the people of God, it is idolatry. It is the subtle seduction of bowing not to Baal, but to a man declared to be God. It is not about leaving the faith, but about corrupting it. And the Scriptures have warned of this hour. The Messiah said, "Many shall come in my name," not denying His name, but claiming it, preaching it, building entire empires upon it, and yet presenting a Christ that he never was. This is the apostasy, the great falling away, not from religion, not from church attendance, but from the truth, from the clarity of the Shema, from the testimony of the prophets, from the oneness of God. It is the replacement of the worship of the Father with the worship of the Son, not as servant, but as equal, as co-eternal, as a second person. And with this elevation comes a shift in the gospel itself. No longer is the message to return to the God of Israel, but to worship the man who died. No longer is salvation about repentance to the Father, but about belief in the deity of his servant. The focus moves subtly, steadily, from the one who sent to the one who was sent, until the original faith is obscured beneath the weight of man-made doctrine. The final deception is not content with confusion. It demands worship. It demands that all who will not bow to this redefined Christ be cast out, labeled heretics, silenced, and rejected. It is the spirit that spoke through Rome, that forced confessions at the tip of a sword, and it lives on, not in persecution of truth by the world, but by those who claim to be the keepers of it. And just as in the days of Elijah, the prophets must now rise and confront the altar built to a God who is not God. They must call fire from heaven, not to destroy, but to reveal, to show once again that the Lord is God, that he alone is worthy of worship, and that the Messiah was not sent to receive glory for himself, but to give all glory to the one who sent him. If this message has stirred your spirit, if the truth has broken chains in your heart, then like, share, and comment below. Let the world hear what the councils tried to silence. Subscribe to this channel to stay rooted in the Word, to walk in the fire of truth, and to prepare for the days to come. Truth must rise, and you are part of that rising.